A pleasure to meet y'all at last. And so, as you probably know by now, there hasn't been all that much in films I'm willing to talk about again. However, for the entirety of this coming week, I'm in fact going to change that. In fact, I do intend to wrap up this whole thing as soon as I can. There's just a lot of things that I need to do with this series. So many movies that I want to cover again. But for this instance, what I'm going to do is lay down my own perspective of another new film that had just come out. Basically, Venom: The Last Dance. The third piece of the Venom series starring Tom Hardy is without a doubt an ending to a well-known series of which that brought along the anti-hero that is known by Venom, an outcast of the planet Clintar and a symbiote that bonds to an ex-reporter known as Eddie Brock. And well, in this instance, I could certainly tell you, a good 6 years have come and gone since we first saw this exact iteration of Venom. And even more so when you get to realize that Venom's live-action appearance the first time around wasn't so great. He certainly didn't have that beefy, muscular, and intimidating look that he's known for. But we're glad that as of 2018, Marvel and Sony have been able to fix that up. But in the case of having 3 films now to work with, I mean, there has been some minor mentionings of the first Venom film, and I didn't really bother to watch the second one, knowing how that year went around. But hey, we have a third film here, and it actually is quite a way to follow up on the events that transpired in the previous films. And without a doubt, this sure is a way to wrap things up, to conclusify the story of Venom and Eddie Brock in a meaningful way. Basically, if you're unfamiliar with it, a quick background is that Eddie Brock used to be a reporter who ends up getting fired after a certain conspiracy is revealed. And he and his wife basically are separated, and while he tries to make do with what he has, living alone and whatnot, things do start to get strange for him. Because one day, a symbiote enters his body, and he basically is now harbored with some sort of parasite. And well, it gets crazy. Because Venom reveals himself, shows off some powers, and eventually takes on a rival symbiote known by the name of Riot. And eventually, we are given the post-end credits scene of the first film, to which it's revealed that Woody Harrelson would in fact play Cletus Cassidy, aka Carnage. And that's basically what the second film gave us in 2020. But as we know, it's not a 2020 film, isn't it? Yeah, no wonder why I bothered to watch that. If it's not going to be labeled as a 2020 film, I wouldn't even bother with it, much less even consider talking about it. But hey, the fact that Venom gets to beat Carnage in a live-action setting, it's pretty unique. And now we have this. This is the point where Eddie Brock and Venom are now officially in Mexico. Supposedly, this is basically their way of escaping from the scenes that had been made because of their destructive paths. And while they don't necessarily see themselves as villains, most of us are practically led to believe that they are indeed villainous characters. However, the more official terminology that's given to them, especially now with a new film that's about them, is anti-hero. Because they certainly don't intend on hurting people or damaging property. No. While Venom is commonly seen as a person who might be a bit on the destructive side, it's more of him trying to have his way of life, his way of enjoying every precious moment, and more importantly, to have fun with himself. And well, to have a human host certainly did mean that he was not only going to have a good companion who was faithful to him, but this one symbiote who was a force to be reckoned with from the get-go. I'd say in this instance, The Last Dance really shows his personality. And he truly is an unhinged and hilarious piece of crap to accompany Eddie Brock on his journey. And we certainly can't forget the fact that both Eddie and Venom were both portrayed by Tom Hardy. Yeah, who would have thought that he would have the time to play both roles? Well, you know what? They're in Mexico, and it's supposedly because they're on the run from something. Yeah, basically in the instance of the last film, they both get hunted by the American government. A special unit force had been dispatched onto them, specifically with the means to target Eddie and capture Venom for study. And well, in this film, we do get to see a bit more world building regarding the team itself, and more importantly, who are the members? Well, it does turn out that shortly after their little trip in Mexico goes in a few different ways, including a paranoid bartender as well as some unlucky thugs whom captured a bunch of dogs. Well, I guess one nice gag that I can highlight, at least at this point in the film, is that after they consume all of the thugs, just to give Venom some sustenance in the form of brain matter, there's a funny gag going around where Eddie Brock apparently tends to lose his footwear. I mean, he uses his Crocs as weapons, and they eventually get destroyed. Thankfully, Venom comes by and steals some boots for him. So, that's pretty nice, if you ask me. They do try to make their way over to New York, where supposedly they can get some help, and while it does seem promising, it's a pretty long road, because they do need to hitch a ride on a plane. He obviously can't go on there on his own because Eddie is basically on the wanted list. This special unit force, which is actually situated literally in New Mexico. Yeah. Area 51, nonetheless. A combination of all the Roswell crap and all the new crap that has now been formulated was apparently going to be decommissioned. And you know what? Decades of all this drama relating to alien study, and with all these years relating to raids in the government facility that is many years old now, I mean, it only does make sense to eventually tear the place apart and basically create a fresh, new approach to the whole thing entirely. Basically, this place is known as Area 55. Yeah. A sandfall basically does shroud the entrance and allow for the members, including two doctors known by the name of Sadie Christmas, as well as Teddy Payne. And we certainly can't forget about Rex Strickland, whom was basically one of the commanders of the team itself. Of course, both doctors are played by Juno Temple and Clark Becko, while Chiwetel Ejiofor, which, like I've said, please let me know if I mispronounced that name, well, he plays Rex Strickland. Of course, with all these characters that come into mind, introduced mainly as a way of continuing the story based on the pursuit against Eddie Brock and Venom, there also is one other piece of the story that we might as well cover now. Because, after all, the military aren't the only people that are after Eddie and Venom. No, there's another threat. A third danger they have to occupy themselves with. Because eventually what happens is that a certain alien creature comes up to them. Essentially, when Eddie and Venom hitch a ride on a plane, they're eventually spotted by this creature that's sort of like something that you'd see out of Starship Troopers or even the Men in Black series. This is apparently regarded as a certain alien species that comes from a certain planet. A planet that is in fact home to a certain prison regarding a certain figure. Yeah, basically, in the opening scene of the film itself, it's basically given a brief display of a person whom happens to be locked up. And all these creatures that he's summoning are basically his servants. These servants of his do in fact have names of their own way. And well, if I'm gonna be honest with you, well, these creatures are in fact known as xenophages. And so, if xenomorphs have taught us anything, well, the xenophages are in fact an entirely different level of scary, terrifying aliens. I wouldn't say that they were that scary, like compared to that thing from Alien Romulus. Oh man. It still is the scariest thing that we've ever seen, period. But the xenophages are at least a different thing to worry about here. Because throughout the whole plot of the film, they are seen as merely pursuing Eddie and Venom. But for the most part, it's because of what had happened in the last film. And it's nice that we do get some explanations on various events that have happened, and also a lot of tie-ins to past interactions that have happened with characters in the older films. So this way, this new film can at least help us get to where we are now, but more importantly, feed off of past information to allow for us future viewers to get a better understanding of what's going on. So, there's a lot of backstories and whatnot that do at least have a lot of continuity with the series itself, which is definitely a good amount of points that we can give to Sony and Marvel on their behalf for ensuring that a third Venom film doesn't actually suck. But above all that, a codex is hidden inside of Eddie's body. And that actually is the reason why the xenophages are after them in the first place. Yeah. So if you thought that it was crazy that Venom could sing tequila, that Venom could turn into a racehorse, that Venom could basically float around in the water and get captured only to turn into a fish and a frog and then basically help in defeating the xenophage, which doesn't work out at all, and they're forced to retreat, then whoa. Maybe we could talk a bit about that little scene on the highway where everybody in the theater was just laughing, and laughing. We so should have gotten kicked out for that. But how could we help it? Venom and Eddie are inside of a hippie's van. And well, this guy by the name of Martin, as well as his family, known as the Moons, they basically invite Eddie along on a road trip where they will take him as far as Las Vegas, Nevada. And well, while Eddie does oblige to the whole thing and even does have himself a free meal from them, it does get crazy. When they're actually on the road and Martin starts to sing a song, Eddie doesn't feel like singing, but Venom does. Oh my gosh, just when you think that things couldn't get any funnier, even the dog, Blue, starts to sing. Man. Talk about hamming up the comedy as a means to help all the bloodshed and violence and all the shootouts and all the death. I mean, that's at least a good way to help recover from all the crazy stuff that had happened back when those troops were deployed on the river and they almost killed Eddie and captured Venom, and even though they got out of there alive, it was barely so. Those xenophages were basically grinding up the soldiers' bodies and spraying their blood from the back of their neck. Wow. It's like I said, the gore in this sure does seem to go up even higher. If you thought Carnage was a massive bloodshed monster, well, think again. Anyways, though, Eddie does make it to Nevada, and he and Venom do give their thanks to the Martin Moon family itself. They do proceed to make their way over to a casino, but they apparently have a dress code, which they were able to fix thanks to a businessman urinating on them and stealing his suit, as well as brand new shoes. So that way, there's no excuse for Eddie to get inside and score himself a win. He was given a good $20 after all, which did guarantee him at least a bit of a chance. He unfortunately blows it all and almost causes a scene just when, believe it or not, Miss Chen shows up. Yeah, I might as well mention that Miss Chen is a recurring character that was first seen at the convenience store that Eddie would go to at times during the first film, and she also was an essential piece in the second film. Here in the third film, though, she really does become helpful for him. The fact that she's now in Vegas really shows that she has developed more as a character and also has grown significantly at what she does in her daily life. So I could see now why being in Vegas would be her big priority at this point. It's also kind of a funny coincidence when you think about it, because the fact that Eddie was there too just meant, how could they not spend some quality time? Well, the sad thing to all this is that it basically just comes to an end at some point, because Eddie and Venom do eventually get captured. And as for Martin, he and his family, the Moons, are still determined to find alien life out there in the United States. And what better place to look to than at Area 51, the very same Area 51 that was being decommissioned. It was only a matter of days before the place would finally be completely torn down. And well, some major pieces still have yet to be taken and put through annihilation. But of course, when the Moons do explore the place, they are careful to avoid any detection and eventually make it to a lookout tower where they just look at from the top, hoping to find whatever aliens could be out there inside the facility. As for Eddie though, he just wakes up in a certain room. Waking up to find that Venom is gone, 2 doctors of course come to visit him. And wouldn't you know, that both doctors were actually kind enough to try to assist him to understand Venom a little more effectively, being that they also had a man whom also contained a symbiote in his system. This symbiote, of course, was able to relay information to both doctors as well as Rex. So that way, Payne, Strickland, and Christmas could also get a further understanding of how the Codex was going to affect them. All these symbiotes wanted was a safe haven of some sorts, but yet they were being pursued, hunted by the xenophages, as well as this Dark King, whom is hoping to get freed from prison by having the Codex in his possession. Of course, Strickland hopes to kill Eddie to prevent the Codex from becoming useful. Yeah, not a real good way to put it together. They could have just fished the Codex out of his body and then like tossed it up in the air or something. I mean, if they were that advanced as a military force, do you think they would have had a smarter idea than just killing somebody? Whereas Venom probably would have had a different idea overall, one that actually could have benefited them both. Anyways though, it's not long before more xenophages start to enter the base. And these ones don't mess around. They're out there killing everybody, and Venom, once he does get freed, along with the other symbiotes, they do start to put up a massive fight. This big xenophage here, compared to the last one, was certainly a force to be reckoned with. But as we know, the symbiotes definitely put up a good fight as well. And it seems that with every symbiote that finds themselves a host, they do seem to possess them with unique talent and unique weaponry. You got one that could run super fast, one that can extend their arms kind of like Mr. Fantastic, and then you got one that can create hammer weapons with his hands, and you got one that can fly. I mean, it's an entire family of symbiotes compared to the last few that we've seen so far. You have Riot, who was basically a powerful and rivalous peace of mind. Riot was definitely something. And Carnage was truly a beast. But with all these other with all these other Xenos and symbiotes in mind, it eventually boils down to who is going to survive. Obviously, the Xeno was going to munch up the symbiotes like it was nothing, while the symbiotes themselves barely make a stand. So of course, with guns pretty much being ineffective, high-powered caliber bullets, bombs not being as effective, there were thankfully some ways that you could actually take him down for good. In one instance, Eddie is riding on a motorcycle and Venom eventually grabs onto 2 nearby plane wrecks, grabbing onto some blades and chopping up the Xeno like it's nothing. Of course, another symbiote, whom is basically using Christmas as its host, comes along and also tries to help. At least a few of the Xenos are taken down. in this instance, which is nice. But eventually, it all comes down to an end. Christmas's symbiote ends up getting eaten, while both doctors and Strickland are now cornered. Strickland himself ends up getting injured, and as for Eddie and Venom, they eventually go to hide in a nearby helicopter. More Xenos start to close in on them rather quickly. They eventually start to formulate a plan. In this one somber moment, it really comes to mind. What are they going to do now? They obviously can't take on all of these Xenos at once, now without severe injuries or even death in mind. And that's when Venom eventually lays out an idea. The two are now going to have to learn what it feels like to have a sacrifice, to safeguard the other. In this way, it could in fact benefit them both, just like what Venom would have wanted. After all, the true definition of symbiosis is to allow for two organisms to bond with beneficial harmony. And well, in this instance, even though Venom completely separates himself from Eddie, even giving him a nearby door to protect himself with, since after all, by possessing all of the nearby Xenos and dragging them over to a nearby pit where Rex can actually augment his identity, including fingerprints and voice code, he can actually activate the nearby acid vat. And this acid was in fact able to melt away both Venom and all of the xenophages. Yeah. So this way, it makes a permanent ending to the fight. And while Venom does lose it, so do all the Xenos. And as for the Dark King himself, well, he also loses. All of his servants are now defeated, and he is still stuck in prison. No codex to save him. And well, that is in fact how we wrap up this film. Although we do at least get a bit of an epilogue, where Eddie once again finds himself unconscious, and he also wakes up in a hospital bed once again. But this time, he has a higher member of the military beside him, explaining to him that Venom is in fact dead and not coming back. And it probably wouldn't have worked out even if he did. Of course, Eddie is given a reminder to not lay a word of this to anybody out there. Area 55 seems to be way more incredible compared to Area 51. So of course, while Eddie does oblige, going to New York just as he originally planned, he thinks of how Venom, had he still been with him, he could have actually seen his dream come true. So overall, compared to most other things that are around, Venom: The Last Dance gives us a lot of sad moments, happy moments, frightening moments. It really is a good mixture of different emotional levels that you would never think would appear in most other films. There's a good majority of films in the industry that happen to focus solely on one or maybe two types of emotions, but this one seems to drive up multiple things. It's something that's made us laugh and cry and get a bit angry even. But it's really an amazing mixture. There's not that many films out there that can actually pull this off successfully. And maybe with that in mind, I actually am more than willing to consider this as the best of the Venom films thus far. The first one, it wasn't insane as it was. But with this, having lots of enemies to defeat, lots of symbiotes to work with, eventually leading up to one big sacrifice that safeguards the life of Eddie Brock himself, it really is a recipe that calls for a nice big scoring. So for this instance, a good 8.5 out of 10.1 is what I'm willing to give this piece. And this is, quite frankly, a nice way to wrap up the series after a good 6 long years have passed. But there's no telling what else could go down. We know that there's going to be a lot more related Sony and Marvel films. But of course, with Kraven the Hunter on the line, plus more of these, who knows how well they can go. Because one thing's for sure, with Marvel and Sony, it's a bit tough to call. But I know that these films will be a lot better because they tend to get better treatment compared to any crap that the MCU could lay out. So of course, for the whole rest of the week, do expect me to cover larger series out there relating to films that I'm willing to talk about again. And in terms of newer films, there probably will be more that I'll do by the time I put this series to an end for now. And make sure that you like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.
Whatever I want, I usually get, and I'm thinking I want you, but I don't have you yet. I ain't got no tricks to be playing on you.